It was a freezing morning in February of 1932, in a coal town outside Pittsburgh, when a 38-year-old machinist named the kind of man your grandfather would have known walked past a soup line that stretched 3 full blocks. He did not stand in it. He turned left, opened the back door of his rented garage, and by sundown that day, he had earned more cash than the men shivering in that line would see in a month. He did it with a sharpening wheel, a borrowed cart, and 47 kitchen knives. In a year when a Detroit factory wage averaged around $5 a day, when foreclosure auctioneers rolled across Iowa farms like locusts, and when the banks that had crashed the country in 1929 were still serving eviction notices from the porches of the families they had ruined, certain old trades quietly out-earned the assembly line. No license, no capital, no boss. Just a skill, a back, and the nerve to use them. Stick around, because at number 18 you will hear about the trade a coal town widow ran from her parlor that brought in more, in a single Saturday, than her husband had earned in a month underground. Number 9 is the practice the banks tried to shame people out of using, even though it kept thousands of families fed. And number 2 is the small backyard operation a Tulsa father ran for 3 Dust Bowl years that paid better than any line job in the country. These were the methods your grandfather did not brag about. He just did them. The villains in this story wear pinstripes, sit behind mahogany desks, and signed the foreclosure papers that emptied the heartland. Before we count down, subscribe, because almost nobody under 40 knows these methods even existed. The corporate world spent decades training us to forget. Let me show you what they buried. Number 20. The boarding house bed. In 1933, a widow on a side street in Akron, Ohio, took the front parlor of a 4-bedroom house she could no longer afford, slid in 4 narrow cots, and started renting beds by the night to single men hunting work at the rubber plants. The going rate was about 35 cents a bed, with a breakfast of cornmeal mush and weak coffee included. 4 cots, full most nights, meant nearly $10 a week after groceries. A factory hand on the Ford line earned roughly $25 a week, but he had to commute, eat his own meals, and pay rent of his own. The widow earned from her own kitchen, in her own apron, without ever clocking in. The bed business died slowly as the war years pulled men into barracks, and rooming houses got priced out by motor courts. Demand never left. The workers did. Number 19. Hand-sewn work shirts for the rail crews. In the Tennessee Hill Country in 1934, women who had grown up at a Treadle Singer started cutting cotton work shirts from feed sacks and selling them by the dozen to railroad section gangs passing through. A finished shirt sold for around 40 cents at a time when factory shirts sold for $1.10. A skilled hand could finish 6 shirts in a day. That meant a week's pay for 3 days' work, paid in coin at the kitchen door. The trade died when ready-made shirts came down in price after the war. But in those hard years, the hum of a treadle meant the lamp oil got paid for. Number 18. The kitchen table baking round. And yes, this is the trade I teased at the top. In a coal town parlor in West Virginia in 1932, a widow named the kind of name your great-aunt carried baked 12 loaves of bread, 4 apple pies, and a tray of cinnamon rolls every Saturday morning before sunrise. She loaded them in a child's wagon, walked the camp road, and by 10 in the morning she had sold out. A loaf went for a dime, a pie for 30 cents, a roll for a nickel. Total Saturday haul, often above $3 in coin. That single Saturday matched what her husband had brought home in a 6-day week underground at the seam. The kitchen smelled like yeast and wood smoke for 2 days afterward. The trade died when sliced bread arrived in cellophane and Wonder Bread bought the bakery shelves. The principle is identical. We just dressed it up with new words. Number 17. Knife and tool sharpening on a pushcart. In a Brooklyn neighborhood in 1933, an old Italian grinder pushed a foot pedal wheel down the side streets, ringing a small bell. Housewives leaned out of third-floor windows and dropped knives, scissors, and cleavers down in cloth bundles. 10 cents a knife, 15 for shears. The grinder finished 40 in an afternoon. That was $4 in a single day at a time when many factory men did not see $4 until Thursday. The wheel hissed, threw orange sparks, and smelled like hot iron. The trade died when stainless steel and 12-cent factory knives made resharpening feel quaint. Operators today still report a steady living from farmers' markets and restaurant routes, working out of a converted van. Number 16. Mending and turning collars. In 1934, in a rented room above a barber shop in Cleveland, a widow with a thimble and a sharp eye took in shirts whose collars had frayed at the fold. She removed the collar, turned it inside out, and restitched it so the worn edge sat hidden under the chin. 15 cents a collar. She did 20 a day. That was $3 a day, in a city where a factory wage hovered around $1 an hour at best. Her room smelled of starch and pressing iron. The trade died when shirts got cheap enough to throw away. Skill in, money out. That was the whole equation. First, here is where things get interesting. The next batch shifts the math entirely, because so far these were skills carried out of the old country or down from grandmothers. What comes next involves the land itself, the woods and the alleys, and the people who learned to read them. In the worst years of the Depression, men and women who knew how to harvest from places nobody else thought to look out earned the lines on the factory floor without ever asking a boss for a thing. The land kept giving. The banks just could not foreclose on a creek bed or an oak grove. Number 15. Ginseng digging in the Appalachian Hills. In the spring of 1933, a teenage boy in the Kentucky hollers walked the shaded north-facing slopes with a forked stick and a burlap sack, looking for the 5-leafed plant that brought $10 a pound dried at the buyer's shed. A good day yielded a quarter-pound dry weight. 25 days of walking the woods through a season could bring $60 in cash, more than a month at the mill, paid in folded bills from a buyer's tin box. The soil smelled like wet leaves and root cellar. The trade thinned as the wild plants got overdug, but mountain operators still report steady income from the same hollows today, working under permit. Cash in hand. No middleman. No receipt. Just the work and the pay. Number 14. Charcoal burning in the hardwoods. In the Ozark backwoods. In 1935, a family kept 3 earth-covered kilns smoking day and night through the cool months. Each kiln took a cord of oak and turned it into roughly 12 bushels of charcoal. Charcoal sold to blacksmiths and home heating customers at around 50 cents a bushel. One full burn earned $6. 3 kilns running on a rotation meant a steady $18 a week, paid in coin from local accounts. A Detroit assembly line that year paid around $25 for 60-hour weeks. The charcoal earner kept his own hours and worked his own woodlot. The smell of slow smoke clung to a man's clothes for the whole season. Number 13. The chicken and egg route. In rural Iowa, in 1932, a farm wife kept 50 laying hens behind the smokehouse and ran an egg route into the nearest town twice a week. 2 dozen eggs went for around 40 cents during good weeks. 20 customers per round, 2 rounds a week, meant nearly $16 a week in clean money after feed costs. That was more than the husband cleared at the threshing crew when the threshing crew still ran. The hens chuckled in the dawn light, and the wire basket clattered against her hip as she walked the porches. The trade died when supermarket dairy cases swallowed the small root. Demand never left. The workers did. Number 12. Scrap metal hauling with a mule and wagon. In Birmingham, Alabama, in 1933, a one-time foundry worker laid off when the steel orders dried up, bought an old mule for $9, hitched it to a flatbed wagon, and worked the alleys behind the warehouse district at dawn. Copper wire, brass fittings, lead pipe, cast iron radiators. The scrapyard paid by the pound. A good week brought in $22 in cash, paid through the chain link window. His hands stayed black. His back ached. But the mill that had laid him off paid roughly the same wage to men still working 60-hour weeks under a foreman's eye. The trade died when the war effort pulled scrap into government drives and the alleys cleared out. It came back twice. It will likely come back again. Number 11. Taking in laundry on a back porch. In a tenement courtyard in Chicago in 1932, a Polish-American mother of four set up 2 galvanized tubs and a wringer on her wooden porch, scrubbed bachelors' shirts and sheets all morning, and hung them on a long line that ran across the courtyard. 15 cents a shirt, 8 cents a sheet. A good Monday took in nearly $2 before the noon whistle. 6 days a week brought close to $12, paid in coin in a mason jar on the kitchen shelf. A South Side stockyard worker earned around $15 a week and came home smelling of slaughter. The porch smelled of lye soap and bluing. The trade died when home electric washers and commercial laundries took the work indoors and uphill. The system never stopped working. We just forgot we were allowed to use it. Now here is something the history books leave out. Step back for a second, because every method so far shares one thing. They needed almost no money to start. A grinding wheel, a treadle singer, a flock of hens, a mule and a wagon, 2 tubs, and a strong back. The barrier was never capital. The barrier was the willingness to put your hands on the work in public, where the neighbors could see. The banks made it look complicated. It never was. If you are still with me, hit that like button. It is the only way more people find videos like this one. Number 10. Ice cutting and storage. In northern Wisconsin, in the winter of 1934, a small crew of 3 men cut ice blocks from a frozen lake using long cross-cut saws and horse-drawn tongs, hauled the blocks to a sawdust-insulated shed, and sold them through the summer to farmhouses, butcher shops, and small dairies. A 200-pound block sold for around 40 cents in July. A single good winter put up 200 blocks. That was $80 from a single shed, earned over weekend cuts in 3 cold months. The wood-handled saws shrieked across the ice. The crew's beards froze solid before noon. The trade died when mechanical refrigeration came to the countryside. The principle is identical. We just dressed it up with new words. Number 9. The very practice the banks tried to shame people out of using. The home-still corn liquor trade in the mountain counties where prohibition had only just ended. In 1933, kept on running for years afterward through the loophole of unlicensed production. In a Tennessee holler in 1934, a third-generation distiller kept a copper still in a laurel thicket, ran 2 5-gallon batches a week through the warm months, and sold quart jars at $1 apiece through trusted runners. 10 gallons a week, 40 quart jars, meant $40 in cash on a weekly basis, paid in folded bills tucked under a flat rock at the drop. A textile mill worker in that county earned around $12 a week. The still smelled of corn mash and wood smoke and apple. The trade did not exactly die. It went legal in some places, and stayed underground in others. Industries spent billions making us forget. We are remembering. Number 8. Photographing weddings and funerals with a borrowed camera. In a small Ohio town in 1933, a former vaudeville hand who could not get back on the circuit bought a used folding Kodak from a pawn shop for $4 and started knocking on church doors before Saturday weddings. $2 for a half-dozen prints, delivered within a week from a kitchen darkroom. 2 weddings a weekend, 1 funeral midweek, meant $6 a week in clean money. Not as much as a mill wage, but with no commute, no boss, and no foreman docking pay for a slow afternoon. The chemical bath smelled like vinegar. The trade thinned as professional studios consolidated. Demand never left. The workers did. Number 7. Fishing the rivers for the local fish market. In 1934, on a slow-moving Mississippi backwater in Tennessee, a one-armed Great War veteran ran a trot line with 60 hooks at dawn and again at dusk, brought in catfish by the bushel, and sold the dressed fish to a city market for 12 cents a pound. A good morning meant 30 pounds. 60 pounds a day at 12 cents was over $7 in cash. 6 days a week meant more than $40 a week at a time when the steel mills back home paid around 22. The fish smelled of river mud and oak smoke once they hit his smokehouse. The trade died as commercial fleets and supermarket freezers crushed the small operators. The trade died slowly. The need did not. Number 6. The Rag and Bone Alley Route. In the back alleys of St. Louis in 1933, a former teamster with a horse he had refused to sell ran an alley route every Tuesday and Friday, collecting old rags, bones, copper, paper, and broken kitchen tools. Then, sorted the haul into bins behind a rented shed. Rag mills paid a penny a pound. The bone meal plant paid 2 cents a pound. Copper paid more. A full day on the route brought in $12 in mixed weight. The horse smelled like dust and harness oil. The route died as municipal trash collection swallowed the alleys, and curbside bins replaced the back gates. It cost almost nothing to start and paid every single week. Here is where the story gets personal. The next methods are not just history. They are the future hiding in plain sight. From here, the list stops being history and starts being instructions for the people who pay attention. Each of these out-earned the Detroit assembly line in the worst years of the slump by a clean margin, and they did it without a foreman, without a punch clock, and without a single bank loan. The banks could not foreclose on a skill. They tried. Number 5. The Millinery Hat Trade. In a small Massachusetts mill town in 1934, a widow with a steam form and a sense of style refurbished hats for the wives of bank tellers and teachers who could no longer afford a new one. 80 cents to reblock a felt hat. $1.50 for a full trim refresh with a new ribbon and a fresh feather. 6 hats a day at $1 each averaged in. That was $6 a day, more than a factory man's daily wage in the same town. The shop smelled of wet wool and shellac. The trade died when hats fell out. Of daily dress in the 1960s, but small refurbishers today report steady work from the vintage clothing world. The hardest part is believing you are allowed to charge what you are worth. Number 4. Beekeeping and honey on the country highway. In a Vermont meadow in 1935, a 60-year-old farmer who had lost half his orchard to the bank kept 20 hives along the south-facing slope of his remaining acres. A strong hive yielded 50 pounds of honey a year. Honey sold at 30 cents a pound from a stand at the end of the dirt road. 20 hives meant 1,000 pounds. $300 a season, in cash, paid by passing motorists in folded bills dropped into a coffee can. A Detroit factory wage came in around $1,200 a year for a full 60-hour annual schedule. The hive smell, warm wax and clover and pine smoke hung over the whole meadow in late summer. The trade thinned as supermarket honey arrived in plastic bears. It was not a hustle. It was a way of life that paid. Number 3, the small-town newspaper route and printing job. In a railroad town in Nebraska in 1932, a 15-year-old boy whose father had been laid off from the roundhouse ran a paper route at dawn, a delivery service of small parcels at noon, and a hand-operated mimeograph machine in a back room of the family kitchen at night, printing handbills for local merchants at 50 cents a hundred. The combined work brought in $14 a week. His father had earned $18 at the roundhouse before the layoff. The boy was 15 and brought home almost the same in his apron pocket. The mimeograph ink smelled of solvent and damp paper. The trade died, as offset printing and supermarket flyers swallowed the small print jobs. They did not wait for permission. Neither should you. Number 2, and this is the small backyard trade I teased earlier, the one that out-earned any line job in Tulsa for 3 full Dust Bowl years: the backyard rabbitry. In an Oklahoma yard in 1933, with the dusty still streaking the kitchen windows red, a father of 4 laid off from the refinery built 6 wooden hutches against the back wall of his garage and started breeding meat rabbits. Each doe produced roughly 40 offspring a year. The dressed rabbit sold to butchers and restaurant kitchens for around 40 cents a pound. A 4-pound rabbit cleaned out at $1. 20. He produced 200 rabbits in a year. That was nearly $240 in his first full year, on top of the pelts, which sold to a furrier for 30 cents apiece. The hutches smelled of Timothy hay and warm fur and pine shavings. The dust storm rattled the tin roof of the garage. He paid the property tax for 3 Dust Bowl years on those rabbits alone. The Detroit assembly line that year averaged around $1,200 annual gross. The rabbitry, with eggs and a garden alongside it, kept the family fed and the bank away from the door. Industries spent billions making us forget. We are remembering. Number 1. The Apex method, the one nobody talks about anymore, and the single most surprising number on this list: the fur trapline along the upper Midwest Creek Country. In a snowed-in cabin in northern Minnesota in 1932, a 40-year-old man who had walked away from a closed iron mine ran a trapline of 62 sets along 8 miles of creek bottom, working a circuit every other day from October through March. Mink pelts sold at $6 apiece in 1933 prime. Muskrat at 50 cents. Beaver at $8. Fox at $4. A good winter haul of 10 mink, 200 muskrat, 12 beaver, and 15 fox brought in over $300 in a single season at the fur buyer's shed in Duluth. He worked 5 months, walked 20 miles a day in snowshoes, and came out the other side of winter with more cash in his pocket than a Detroit line worker brought home in an entire year. The traps smelled of beeswax and balsam. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and damp wool. His hands were cracked, his shoulders ached, and the bank that had foreclosed on his cousin's farm could not touch a single dollar of it. The trade thinned as fur fell out of fashion in the late 1940s, then collapsed under the weight of fashion shifts in the 1980s, and survived in pockets through the present. Cash in hand, no middleman, no receipt, just the work and the pay. Across all 20 methods, the same pattern repeats. Almost no money to start. Skills any patient person could learn. Demand that did not vanish with the slump. And work that paid better than the assembly line. In the worst economic stretch this country had ever seen. These were not survival tricks. They were small economies that the banks and the big chains needed 3 more decades to crush. Pick one, just one. I want to know which one you chose, because the choice tells me something about what you would have done in 1932. A wagon, a hive, a hutch, a treadle, a trap. Tell me in the comments which one you would have tried in your grandfather's town, and whether you would have started with the rabbits at number 2 or the beehives at number 4.